friends, it's your teen and tween librarian Rebecca, and we're back for another episode of Bedtime Stories. Last episode, we actually started on our journey. We got to see a lot of what was packed and the plans for the trip, and most importantly, I think we met one of our main characters, Hans, who will be with the professor and Axel for their entire trip. He doesn't know that they are journeying to the center of the earth. So it'll be, interesting to see once he does find out what the plans are, how he reacts. He doesn't have a lot of emotional reactions, so it's hard to tell. It's also interesting, to me at least, how our stoic, somewhat emotionless guide is going to react with our excitable and very emotional professor, and how that's just going to, who knows, maybe it'll work great. We'll definitely know how Axel feels about it because he is, I feel, the definition of a snarky observer. But we are ready to go. Food is packed. That's all Axel cared about, right? So let's go see the first stretch of their journey in chapter 12. Enjoy. Chapter 12. Slow Progress. We had set off under a cloudy but settled sky. There was no danger either of tiring heat or of heavy rain. It was perfect tourist weather. The pleasure of riding on horseback through unknown country put me in a good mood for the start of our journey. I gave myself up to the happiness of the tourist, compounded of desires and freedom, and began to make the best of the expedition. Besides, I said to myself, where's the risk in traveling through a most interesting country, climbing a remarkable mountain, and at the worst going down into an extinct crater? Obviously, that's all Saknussemm did. As for the existence of a passage leading to the center of the world, that's pure imagination, and absolutely impossible. So let's get all the pleasure we can out of this expedition without worrying about it. I had scarcely finished this reasoning before we had left Reykjavik behind. Hans walked ahead at a quick, even, and untiring pace. The two baggage horses followed him of their own accord, and behind them came my uncle and me, looking not too ridiculous on our small but hardy animals. Iceland is one of the largest islands in Europe. It has a surface of 14,000 square miles and has a population of only 60,000. The geographers have divided it into 4 quarters, and we had to cross diagonally the southwest quarter, known as the Suðvesturfjörðungur. On leaving Reykjavik, Hans had immediately taken a path along the coast. We rode between meager pastures, which were having all the trouble in the world to look green. Yellow came to them more easily. The rugged summits of the trachyte hills on the horizon were blurred by the mist in the east. Now and then a few patches of snow, concentrating the diffused light, glittered on the slopes of the distant mountains. Certain peaks, rising more sheerly than the others, pierced the great clouds and reappeared above shifting vapors like reefs emerging in the sky. Often, these chains of barren rocks would stretch out towards the sea, encroaching on the pasturage, but there was always enough room left to pass. Besides, our horses instinctively chose the best way without ever slackening their pace. My uncle was cheated even of the satisfaction of urging his mount on with the voice of or whip. He had no excuse for losing his patience. I could not help smiling at seeing him, such a tall man, on his little horse, and his long legs almost touched the ground. He looked like a centaur with 6 legs. Good horse, he kept saying. You will see, Axel, there is no animal more intelligent than the Icelandic horse. Snow, storms, impassable roads, rocks, glaciers, nothing can stop him. He is brave, steady, and reliable. He never stumbles, never shies. If there is a river or a fjord to cross, and there'll be plenty, I can tell you that, you will see him plunge straight into the water as if he were amphibious, or swim across to the opposite bank. But we mustn't hurry him. Just let him alone, and we shall do our 30 miles a day. We may, but what about our guide? Oh, I'm not worried about him. People like that can walk miles without even noticing it. This man moves about so little that he can't get tired. Besides, if need be, I can always let him have my horse. I shall soon get a cramp if I don't have a little exercise. My arms are all right, but I mustn't forget about my legs. Professor doesn't skip leg day. Meanwhile, we were making rapid progress. The country was already almost a desert. Here and there we saw an isolated farm, a lonely boar made of wood, earth, or blocks of lava, and looking like a beggar by the wayside. These dilapidated huts gave the impression of asking the passerby for charity. We almost felt inclined to give them alms. In this region, there were no roads or paths, and the vegetation, however slowly it grew, soon obliterated all trace of the rare travelers. Yet this part of the province, not far from the capital, was regarded as one of the inhabited and cultivated portions of Iceland. What then must the other parts be like, if they were more deserted than this desert? After traveling half a mile, we had not seen a single farmer standing on the door of his cottage, nor a single shepherd minding a flock less wild than himself. Nothing but a few cows and sheep left to their own devices. What then could we expect to see in the regions convulsed by eruptions and born of volcanic explosions and subterranean disturbances? We were destined to see them later on, but, consulting Olsen's map, I saw that we were avoiding them by following the winding coastline. The great plutonic movement was in fact largely confined to the interior of the island. There were the horizontal layers of superimposed rocks, known as trups in the Scandinavian languages, the beds of trachyte, the eruptions of basalt, tuff, and all the volcanic conglomerates, and the streams of molten lava and porphyry have created a land of supernatural horror. I had no idea at that time of the sight which awaited us on the Sneffels Peninsula, where this debris of a nature in eruption forms a scene of frightful chaos. 2 hours after leaving Reykjavik, we reached the little town, or Eolkirkja, meaning principal church, of Gufunes. There was nothing remarkable about the place. It consisted of only a few houses, and would scarcely be regarded as a hamlet in Germany. Here, Hans stopped for half an hour. He shared our frugal breakfast, answering my uncle's questions about the road with a yes or no, and when asked where he proposed to spend the night, he said simply, Gardir. I consulted the map to see where Gardir was. I saw a village of that name on the banks of the Hvalfjord, 18 miles from Reykjavik. I showed it to my uncle. Only 18 miles? He said. 4 miles out of 100? What a miserable little walk. He began to say something to the guide, who, without answering, took his place at the head of the horses and set off again. 3 hours later, still treading on the pale grass of the pasture land, we rounded the Kollafjord, a detour which was less trouble than crossing the inlet. Soon we entered a Pingstaur, or parish called Eyjolfberg, from whose steeple 12 o'clock would have struck if Icelandic churches had been rich enough to possess clocks, but they are like their parishioners, who have no watches and manage very well without. There the horses were baited. Then, taking a narrow path between a chain of hills and the sea, they carried us straight to the Eolkirkja of Branter, and a mile farther on to the Annexia, or chapel, of ease at Saubor, on the south bank of the Hvalfjord. It was now 4 o'clock, and we had traveled 4 Icelandic miles, or 20 English miles. The fjord was at least 2 miles wide at this point. The waves broke with a roar on the sharp rocks, and the whole inlet was confined between steep walls of rock 3,000 feet high, and remarkable for its brown strata separated by beds of reddish tuff. However intelligent our horses might be, I did not look forward to crossing an arm of the sea on the back of a quadruped. If they are really intelligent, I said, they won't try to cross. In any case, I intend to be intelligent for them. But my uncle refused to wait. He spurred his horse on toward the shore. The animal sniffed at the nearest wave and stopped short. My uncle, who had instincts of his own, urged it on, only to be met with a fresh refusal from the animal, which shook its head. There followed oaths and blows with the whip, whereupon the horse reared up and tried to throw its rider. Finally, it bent its knees, escaped from under the professor's legs, and left him standing on two boulders on the shore, like the Colossus of Rhodes. "Confounded animal!" cried the rider, suddenly transformed into a pedestrian, and as shamefaced as a cavalry officer transferred to the infantry. "Varja," said the guide, touching him on the shoulder. "What? A ferry?" "There," replied Hans, pointing to a boat. "Then why didn't you say so? Well, let's go." "Tidvatten," said the guide. "What is he saying?" I asked. "He says the tide," said my uncle, translating the Danish word for my benefit. "Perhaps he meant that we have to wait for the tide?" "Forbidden?" asked my uncle. "Ja," replied Hans. My uncle stamped his foot while the horses made their way towards the ferry. I quite understood the need to wait for a particular state of the tide before undertaking the passage of the fjord, that in which the sea is at its highest level. Then the ebb and flow have no perceptible effect, and the ferry is in no danger of being carried either to the head of the fjord or out to sea. That favorable moment arrived only at 6 p.m, when my uncle and I, the guide, 2 ferrymen, and the 4 horses took places in our rather fragile-looking sort of flat boat. Accustomed as I was to the steam ferry boats on the Elbe, I found the oars of the 2 boatmen a poor means of propulsion. It took us over an hour to cross the fjord, but at least the passage was accomplished without any mishaps. Half an hour later, we reached the Aalkirke of Gardær. And that's the end of chapter 12. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Bedtime Stories. Make sure you never miss an episode by subscribing to the library's YouTube channel. You can also find out what's happening at the library by visiting us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. Or you can always just go to the library's website. I hope to see you again for the next episode of Bedtime Stories, but until then, be well and sleep well.